Hi everyone, Tammy here, Flannel Chick MTB. Welcome to my channel. Well, sadly, I'm not coming to you trailside today. I am in my basement, but let's make the most of it. Why don't you grab yourself a coffee or a tea or a beverage of your choice, and we'll talk about tip number 4 today. Today's video is number 4 of 5 game changers for beginner mountain bikers. Welcome back everyone. If you haven't already watched video 1, 2, and 3 of 5 game changers for beginner mountain bikers, I will be referencing some of the things I talked about in those videos in today's video. So the links are in the description below, or you can simply hit the thumbnail at the end of this video and it will take you right over to those videos. And while you're at it, why don't you hit like and subscribe while you're there? Now, today I want to talk with you about a 4th factor that really moved the needle for me in terms of my confidence and my skill progression on my bike. And if this is something that you're not already doing, I think it may make a big difference for you as well. Now, something clicked for me when I finally gave myself permission to slow down a ride, get off my bike, and start sessioning the sections I used to walk or ride around. So today I want to share how I session and what is a session. Now, if you're like me, you may need to be very intentional about incorporating this, and here is why. In an effort to keep up or not hold other people back, I would often get off my bike and walk or run down tricky sections because it was quicker than it would have been for me to figure out how to ride the section. Now, because those more tricky sections were in that progression sweet spot that I spoke about in my last video, I couldn't necessarily just ride them blindly. I needed to work up my courage. I needed to figure out my line choices, my speed, my exit points, my body positioning. All of that needed to be determined before I could even attempt it. And that's what sessioning is all about. Figuring it out mentally and physically, making multiple attempts, approximating it, chunking it, and I'm going to talk with you about how helpful chunking is, and then eventually pulling it all together. But unless you make time for this in your ride, you run the risk of simply walking past all those great opportunities for progression for the sake of keeping up and not holding others back. So, my first sessioning tip is this: be intentional. Now, let me offer what I mean by this. Sometimes being intentional with your progress might look like planning an entire ride for the sake of sessioning one tiny section of trail, or for the sake of working on one specific skill. So for instance, if there is a section you always walk, but you are beginning to feel that it's within your skill to ride, planning on hitting that trail and spending as much time on that section alone as you need would be a sessioning ride. Or if you're wanting to progress on a specific skill, for instance, you may need to purposely choose a trail that allows you to work on that specific skill. For instance, flatter tight corners or steep sections or rooty rocky technical sections. Not all trails have those features. So if you're not intentional, you can end up riding a whole lot of trail that doesn't allow you that specific practice that you are looking for to progress in the way you're desiring. And I'm going to share a personal example of that. But before I do that, an alternative to planning an entire ride around sessioning might be to add a little extra wiggle room in terms of extra allotted time to rides that you're already planning, to allow for time to session if you come to something on that ride that you feel is in that sweet spot for you and that you would like to make some progress on. Now, I do both of these things, but I do have a slight preference. Sometimes I plan entire session rides where the goal is to ride a section over and over and over. But I also really like to add a little extra breathing room in most of my rides so that if I come across something on a trail, I have time to play on it. But my preference tends to be the second. And the reason for that is that sometimes when I dedicate an entire ride to sessioning for the sake of making progress, it can become a bit of a head game for me in that I create this mental situation where I feel this added pressure that today's the day to make progress. And if for some reason I'm not feeling it on that ride, and sometimes that happens, or I'm having a hard time on the bike that day, or if conditions aren't great, it can feel like a real letdown. And in fact, it might even mess my mindset up the next time I'm at that same section because I know I didn't ride it the last time, even though I said I would. Now, in a future video, I'm going to be talking about how you can decide if you should push yourself or if you should just say not today on any given ride. But there is some truth, I think, to the fact that the longer we avoid something, the harder it gets. So there's a fine line, I think, that we need to walk. Now, I have found that I tend to progress the most when I am relaxed and playing and having fun on my bike. It's those times when I just naturally feel a little more courageous and when I'm more likely to push myself to try something just for the heck of it without any preconceived plans or that little added pressure. So for me, giving myself permission to stop on my rides if I come to something I want to work on is my preferred approach. Now, that being said, sometimes we don't have that luxury. Maybe we are riding with a group of people, and for whatever reason, the group can't stop and wait for us. And so there can be benefits to planning sessioning rides. So an example of this is last August, I was in Whistler for a holiday, and all summer, I was toying with the idea of wanting to begin to learn to do drops. Now, if you have watched my first couple of videos, you know how huge this is just in and of itself. Because for years I have proclaimed, I will never jump or drop my bike. So even considering learning feels like huge progress for me. As I begin to ride more advanced technical trails, I'm encountering big roots and rocks. And being able to drop my bike with confidence really would be a next important skill. Now, if you're not familiar with Whistler Bike Park, you might not know, but there are some amazing progression drops for beginners. And it really is such a perfect place to learn to jump or drop your bike. And at that time last summer, I wasn't aware of any progression drops locally. All the drops here were huge. And so I knew if I wanted to begin to learn to drop my bike, I needed to do that while I was on this trip in Whistler. Otherwise, the opportunity would have passed me. And so intentionally creating time to go to those drops and session them really was necessary. But it did create a little bit of pressure for me. I knew my time in Whistler was limited. And I remember one day standing on the side of the trail, looking at the drops, and I watched two different people nearly kill themselves going off one of those drops. It really was not confidence boosting. I wasn't feeling it at all, and I was quite anxious, actually. And I remember thinking, you're running out of time. You promised yourself you would hit these drops while you were here. How are you going to feel loading up and going home and not having done them? So this is why sometimes planning a ride specifically for progressing can add that pressure. A long story short though, I rode the drops. So was that added pressure helpful? Maybe, I don't know. But in general, I personally tend to make most progress when I feel less pressured. So knowing a little bit about yourself and how you learn, how you progress best, I think is really important. Now, on an aside, I do have plans to head back to Whistler Bike Park this summer, and I plan on bringing you with me. I'm going to introduce you to the bike park, and I'm going to ride some green and blue and black trails, give you a taste of what's there. And I'm going to visit those progression drops again and see how they feel a year later with very little practice since. Now, sessioning can look like a lot of different things, but one of the most important things that I want to share with you today that I discovered as I finally began to create opportunities to session is the incredible value of getting off my bike. Now, if you are a brand new mountain biker, you may not realize how incredibly different sections and features look from different angles. Now, I used to get off my bike and stand at the top of a section or a feature, look at it, look down, and decide if I was going to ride it. But it wasn't until I started riding rock rolls or steep sections and features where I was worried about getting bucked that I started to pay attention to the other angles. So I started looking at the trail from multiple angles, from the top, from the sides, and walking down and looking up at a section or feature. And in doing so, I realized how incredibly different it looked. It looked so different from when I was standing on my pedals about to drop into it, or even from when I was standing on my feet at the top and simply looking down. All the angles offered so much different information to help me decide if and how to ride something. And sometimes from one angle, it looked much more intimidating than it did when I took it in from a different perspective. So, the next time you are sessioning, I would really encourage you to move your bike out of the way off the trail. Pay attention, make sure you're not in the way of any oncoming riders, and walk the section. Take it in from the top, from the sides, and from the bottom. And while you're doing this, some of the things that you might want to think about are, where's my line of commitment? What are my line choices? What are the body positions that would serve me? Where are the obstacles? Where are my exits? Where might I be able to brake and manage my speed? Where do I absolutely not want to brake? You might also want to mentally compare the section or the trail to sections, features that you've already successfully ridden, and consider how this one might be similar. This will really help with your commitment and your confidence. So get off your bike and from different angles, take in the section or the feature. Now, this is something you might not know. Even professional riders do this. When racers are preparing for a race, they do something called a track walk. They leave their bike behind and they walk the course. They take the time to evaluate the conditions, the lines. They make decisions about how they're going to ride the sections. Sometimes when we are sessioning, it can feel a bit overwhelming, and that's understandable because we are placing demands on ourselves. To learn something new, and all learning creates some type of stress in us. I spoke about this in my video on mantras, on how learning really requires us to get ahead of our mindset, because when we are learning a new skill on our bike, we are asking ourselves to do something outside of our comfort zone, something that we haven't any evidence yet that we're capable of. So nerves, anxiety are to be expected. And nerves and anxiety can make us sometimes do silly things on the bike. So getting ahead of it with mindset strategies like using mantras can really be helpful. And in terms of sessioning, when overwhelmed, there's another little strategy that we can use, and it's called chunking. And chunking is used in learning situations to break down more difficult or lengthy tasks into smaller parts. So for instance, riding an entire steep section of trail or a really long rock slab, for instance, might be too intimidating. You might be worried about being able to modulate your braking for that long and losing control. But you may have ridden smaller slabs or shorter steep sections in the past. So rather than riding the whole thing, chunking would involve breaking it down into bite-sized pieces. maybe walking your bike down the slab or section, pushing your bike back up, starting part way to ride a small section of the bottom piece, and then maybe starting higher and higher each time, and building on that during your session ride or across the season. Now, on a technical trail, it might mean riding sections of difficult trail and walking other sections and building on that, and eventually piecing them all together. As you gain more confidence on each individual chunk, then you can begin to string more chunks together until you're eventually riding the whole thing. Another element that can be helpful when sessioning is what I spoke about in my last video, and that involves modeling, and not the supermodel kind. When we observe a model perform a task, we learn through observation. So it can be very helpful to have a more experienced rider on your sessioning rides with you. A rider who can show you exactly how it's done. Now, as you stand trailside, watching their line choice, their body position, their speed, you are benefiting. You are giving your brain a chance to see what to expect. You are visualizing the process through the other rider. You are learning through observation. There's also another way, though, to use modeling when sessioning. And when you're riding with more experienced riders, you can take advantage of this. You may have experienced this already. You may find that you are able and willing to ride a new section or a feature that you're a little bit nervous about if you have someone to follow in. This is because there are a lot of actual reasons why following someone is helpful. But in my videos on mantras, I spoke about giving our brain something to chew on and how helpful it can be for our focus and our attention. And following someone in on something is similar in that you're giving your brain a focal point. You give your brain the task simply of tracking the person in front of you, and you leave all the decision making to them about speed and line choice. Now, this reduces the risk of getting overwhelmed, moving into autopilot, and unintentionally hitting your brakes, for instance. It simplifies what you need to do and think about in a learning situation. So in this case, you're sessioning a section or a feature once or twice or repeatedly by following someone through it, and eventually you'll move on to riding it on your own. Now, on another note, never be shy about asking someone if you can follow them in. I think it's fair to say that most people will be really honored when someone who's nervous, who's not ridden something, has the confidence and trust in them to follow them in. Now, it may also help to know even pro riders use this strategy of getting a toe in to help build their confidence and competence when they're riding a new feature. Now, regardless of how you like to session, and I really would love to read your comments about how you plan session rides, there are a few questions that I ask myself that you can use to get the most out of your time on your bike and your ride. And I think the most important, but often overlooked, is this: do I even want to ride this trail, this section, or this feature? Now, I know maybe that sounds like a silly question to ask yourself, but so often I think we try to progress because we think we should be progressing, or because other people are riding the section or feature, or because others around us seem to be making bigger strides, and our progression somehow becomes about comparison to others rather than the pure joy of learning. But if you don't at least want to ride something, you really probably should move along. Let's be honest, unless you're being paid to ride your bike, anything you do on your bike should be motivated by pure personal desire. Now, the second question I ask myself is, can I see myself riding this? Am I able to imagine myself successfully riding this? Or is this so outside my current skill set that I can't even picture it? If something is so beyond your current ability to visualize doing it, then I would say don't. There was a time when those beginner progression drops in Whistler were a hard no for me. And at that time, I couldn't imagine wanting or being able to ever drop them. So know that just because you can't see yourself riding it today doesn't mean you'll always feel that way. But if you do always feel that way, that's totally okay as well, because you don't have to ride anything you don't like or don't want to ride ever. Now, if you can almost see yourself riding something, but not fully, a third question might be, what would it take for me to ride this? Do I need the conditions to be better to try, to be less loose, to be less wet? Do I need to break it down, to chunk it? Do I need to watch someone else ride it? Do I need a model? Do I need a demo? Do I need to follow someone in? Or do I need to go away and build up either my skills or my confidence, or both, by riding something similar and coming back to this at a later time? Now, I want to offer this to anyone out there who might need to hear this. Progression is optional. It is not required. You can decide to ride the same gravel road, the same dirt path, the same green trail for the rest of your life if you like. And if you are enjoying it, you do not need to up your game for anyone. Again, unless this is your job, how you enjoy your time on your bike is your choice. But if you do want to make a little headway, my experience has been this. Giving myself permission and opportunity to session was a game changer for me. And the key to my progression and my best learning tends to be keeping my time on the bike light, fun, and pressure-free. I really would encourage you to think about how you learn and how to own your own ride, and to create the conditions you need to have the most fun on your bike and to progress in a way that feels really good to you. Thanks for joining me, everyone, and for watching today. Please leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear from you. And if you happen to have a new mountain biker in your life, share this video with them. My next video will be 5 of 5 game changers for beginner mountain bikers. And I may be talking about Whistler Bike Park again. So tune in for that one. Please hit the like and subscribe button, and happy riding, everyone.